Welcome to the Business of Widows, real stories of grief, grace, and God's goodness. I'm your host, Abigail Peterson, and this is a special space for those who are walking through the unimaginable. Here we share honest, unfiltered conversations with widows and widowers who have lived through deep loss, yet have encountered God's presence in the middle of their pain. Each episode reminds you that your grief is real, your story matters, and you are not alone. So take a deep breath, come as you are, and join us as we explore heartbreak, healing, holy moments, and the unexpected goodness of God, one story at a time. Hello, and welcome back to the Business of Widows podcast. I am so honored to have a beautiful lady from Bakersfield, California today, Sister Louise Blatto. I have known of her. We have lots of mutual friends. And of course, she's from the Bakersfield Church, which is where some of my apostolic heritage is from as well. So welcome, Sister Blatto, to the podcast. And please introduce yourself and tell us about your love story.
Okay. Thank you, Abigail, for asking me to be a part of this wonderful podcast. It is such a needed ministry, and you do an awesome job. I feel very honored that you asked me, so I thank you very much. Well, Paul Blatto and I met in March of 1982 when he was stationed at USMC El Toro Marine Base in Orange County. We both went to the home church there in Santa Ana, California, for the first 7 years of our marriage. And during that time, God gave us two wonderful sons, Rocky and Jonathan Blatto. In May of 1990, we went evangelizing for 9.5 years, traveling to so many wonderful churches and made so many dear friends whom our family still treasure today. We also pastored in Lawrence, Kansas for a period of 5 years. And then 14 years later, we made our way back to California, where we pastored the wonderful people in Lamont, California. I have 3 grandsons and 2 granddaughters. To tell you just a brief intro to how we met, I need to first tell you a bit of background about myself and then about Paul. When I was 8 months old, my mother received the Holy Ghost. They lived in Anaheim, California. And just 1 year before I was born, they had moved to California from Fort Smith, Arkansas. My father was Church of Christ, but he and my mother together gave us a wonderful, godly home to be raised in. Mom and Dad had been married about 3 to 4 years when she got the Holy Ghost, and it changed the dynamics of our home, but it all worked out. We went half with Dad and half with Mom. After a few years, all of us kids just went with Mom, and we all became Pentecostals, except Dad, who stayed Church of Christ. I was the second of 5 children. From a child, I can remember that in addition to a wonderful church and a wonderful home atmosphere, the Bible became a very dear friend to me from a very early childhood. Today, if you looked under my bed, there's a stack of Bibles that I've marked up very much from when I was 6 years old and upward. I wept over it as a child, and it became an ever-present help to whatever I was going through. It was though I was learning His voice at a very young age, and that would become a real vital part of my future years. When I graduated from high school, I began working. I got a job working in the corporate world, and at age 22, I was hired on by a large company in Irvine, and I was with them for the next 10 years. I rose with the company, traveled for the company all over the Western United States, and it was just a wonderful job. It was a blessing and a gift from God. But all of that paled. I can actually remember leaving that company, leaving that desk that I worked at, and walking the long walk to my car and thinking how lonely I was. All this wonderful job I had paled in comparison to what I really wanted. I wanted my own family. The problem was it wasn't happening. And age 23 came. I was hired with them at age 22. Age 23 came, 24, 27, 28, 29, and I'm still single. Now, I had opportunities to marry, but I never felt that whoever it was right for me. So I just kept living this life. And I called those the waiting room of life for me. Whatever reason anyone may be in God's waiting room that God has put you in, I really want to divert here for a minute and just say that he knows what he's doing. We can't see, but he does. And he knows you. He knows your frame. He knows you. And you don't want someone that would not be good to you, because that's the most important thing, one of them in life. Wait, no matter how long. The waiting room can seem like you're in it forever. And it is so lonely, even no matter how many people are around you. But let me promise you this, that when God puts you in his waiting room, it pays great dividends. I had no idea the investment that I was making. While I was in this waiting room, there were many days, many times that there were just little drops of bread or something that showed me I was on the right path. They weren't major, but they just kind of nudged me to keep going. And sometimes a preacher would preach and tell me something. I could hear it from the pulpit. And it was during those years that God gave me this great revelation. And I was standing in my mother's kitchen, and I was just leaning against a counter, and it was like a light came on in my head, and it said, the thought came to me, it would be better to stay single than to be married to the wrong person. And it just really made me think, I'm sure glad I'm still single and not married to the wrong person. I heard many encouraging stories from preachers' wives, evangelist wives that came through our church. They all wanted to help me, and they did. And they were fun and encouraging to hear. But my story was going to be different, just like theirs was. You see, nobody came and preacher laid a hand on me and told me thus, thus, and thus. I didn't know what my future held. But day after day, in that old church that I grew up in, there I was, and there he was. And he talked with me. He guided my thoughts. One day I was going through something very severe with my company, and I was at the church, and God told me to go get a Bible. And I went. I knew it was his voice. And I picked it up, and literally, I kid you not, the words lifted off the page. And God gave me some promises that still are with me today. He took care of me. His words never fail. I just made up my mind that I would just keep going back to God, and I would not stop praying until God answered my prayer. What did I have to lose? So I just kept praying. Scriptures that are mine even to this day were given to me during those years. What a friend. Well, about 3,000 miles away on January 24th, 1958, in Buffalo, New York, was born a baby boy named Paul John Blatto. It was a very devout Catholic home. There were 6 children. His father worked for the city of Buffalo, and every day he would walk to the Catholic church downtown and pray during his lunch. Paul attended private Catholic schools his whole life. He was also an altar boy. He was involved in community activities and sports in his school. But there was just something in him that he wanted to join the Marine Corps. And in his senior year of high school, he enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps. And a bus picked him up the day after he graduated, and off he went to MCRD Paris Island, South Carolina, boot camp, 1976. His first 4 years of duty took him to all the different western parts of the world, and then he reenlisted for another 4 years, and he was stationed in Dallas, Texas. It was 1 year after his second enlistment, while in Dallas, that he received a call from, we call it a boss, like a lieutenant or something, and said, "Hey, Paul, how would you like to go on a 6-month tour to Patuxent River Naval Air Station in Maryland?" That was the summer of 1981. On a Friday night, 5 months into his tour in Patuxent River, he was sitting in a bar with another Marine who was a backslider. His name was Mike. He looked at Paul and he said, "Paul, do you know that if we died tonight, we would go to hell?" Paul said, "Yes." Mike said, "Let's get out of here and let's go back to the barracks." When they got back to the barracks, Mike went over into a corner and prayed through to the Holy Ghost. Paul knew nothing about Pentecost, but he said, "Mike, whatever you have, I want it." That weekend, they went and met the pastor on a Saturday, and Brother Eby was his name, and he told me later, he said he came and he was so buff. He was 6'3" and really buff and really the Marine epitome of being a Marine. Mm-hmm. And he thought, "I'll never see him again. He's got his life together." But he went. Paul said, "I will be back." Brother Eby said, "Why don't you spend the night with me?" But he said, "No, I will be back tomorrow." That's when Brother Eby thought it's not going to happen, but it did. Paul came the next day for a Sunday night service with a friend from the base that he had brought with him. Not Mike. Mike was already there. And he brought this other guy with him. And he said that he walked into the church and it was like a hammer hit him. The Bible says the word is like a hammer. And he said, it really happened to me. And he said, I could never tell you what was preached. I cried through the whole service. And I looked at the guy that I'd brought with me and I said, don't you feel what I feel? And he said, no, I don't. And Paul went to the altar and got the Holy Ghost and got baptized. Within 3 weeks, he was going back to Dallas. Dallas was his home base, but he had heard that in El Toro, the F4s were coming, and he loved the F4s, and they needed mechanics, and he was a hydraulics mechanic. So he went and signed on to his transfer to El Toro. As he was leaving, he thought, why did I do that? I like Dallas. He went back and said, could you just cancel that, what I just signed up for? And they said, oh, no, you cannot cancel. Mm-hmm. So off he comes to California. And on his way, he needs to spend the night on a Saturday in Yuma on his way to California, and went to church the next morning. And there were 3 Marines there that were from the home church that I attended. And the 3 guys said, well, Paul, where are you going to go to church when you get to California? He said, well, I have a list and I'm not sure yet. They said, well, all the Marines come here. It was March, and I was teaching my Sunday school class, and I saw 2 Marines walk past the window of the class I was teaching. One of those was Paul. It was in April. And Paul really loved to scuba dive. He enjoyed lifting weights. He got the nickname Hercules because he was so strong, and nicknamed Herc. He was a gentle giant. And within about 2 months, sparks started flying and we started liking each other. On December 24th, 1982, we got engaged. Mm-hmm. And on June 4th, 1983, the sun shined brighter than any other day in my life. God had taken such good care of me when he gave me Paul. I never had a doubt about him. I can forward to current now and say that I told you the history of me early on, how we came to California, and those last 5 years that we were at Lamont with those wonderful people. Paul got 4 years into pastoring. He got to where he couldn't breathe well. And come to find out, cancer had metastasized to his fluid around his lungs. And that was in December of 2008. And in May of 2009, he passed away. It was a sad, sad day. I never had experienced anything like it.
What do you remember about, I know you mentioned 2004 is when you guys moved to Lamont and started pastoring. What do you remember? How long after did Brother Blatto pass away? And what do you remember about those early days of grief?
We were so happy to have a home. We were thrilled. We'd lived in a trailer for 9.5 years and just had gotten a home. And really, we were all very excited about being settled. And in 2000 and 4 years later, we celebrated 25 years of marriage. And that was in 2008. And my husband got to where he was struggling with breathing, and we didn't understand why. And finally they realized that they took 2 liters of fluid off of his lungs, the fluid around his lungs, and realized that it was metastasized to the fluid around his lungs, and that he had a very short time to live. And my husband turned 51 in January of that year, and we had just started living. Really, yeah. I know we had a wonderful life, but we had a home now, and so it was the hardest thing I ever went through. And I remember hospice came and brought all their paraphernalia. I don't mean that bad. All their paperwork, and put it on a place in my living room. I wouldn't touch it. I wouldn't look at it. It was so hard for me. But one day, about 3 days before he passed, I needed that information. It was just, I guess you'd call it denial. It was just so hard for me to accept that it really was going to happen. So I remember on my early days of my grief, I remember how painful it was. I remember the tears that just didn't seem to stop flowing. And the guilt, and the if only I would have done this, would this not have happened? And it was very hard. The way I described it was, I felt like I was walking through deep mud, very deep mud, in combat boots that I could barely put one foot in front of the other. I felt so vulnerable. I must say this, that I think at the beginning, you want to fix everything. You want to get it back to like it was. You want to just get it back, and you're vulnerable, but you need to just stand still and wait. I remember the first time after he died that I opened the refrigerator door. That was hard for me. The first time I put saran wrap over some food. I couldn't cook. Everything seemed to remind me of a life that was no more. All the family times, the family dinners, the family trips, Sundays were very hard for me. And it's a minute inside of your cells of yourself that are so in deep despair. And Mother's Day was the next weekend after he died. And soon after that was Father's Day. And then it would have been our next wedding anniversary. And I had 2 wonderful friends who live south in Burbank and Ontario, and they would be there for me, come whenever I needed it. And I would go down where they were. They'd come up to me and just were there for me. And I thank them in my heart every day. As I said, my mom and dad had retired. They came out, spent time with me, but then they were gone. And I called my sisters incessantly. God bless their hearts.
Yes.
Thank God for every sister I have. But of course, they had gone on their way. So it was just me and my 2 sons. And then 1 year later, both of my sons went evangelizing.
Mm.
And then there was total silence. One day the water heater came on and I about jumped out of my skin. It was just so silent.
Mm-hmm.
And one day I got so lonely to be around humans and in a natural way. And I was in the ladies department of Macy's, and I saw 3 ladies that were older than me visiting and chatting, and just a normal day for them. And they'll never know that I went and stood a little distance from them just to hear their voice and to hear something that was just normal and regular.
Mm.
During that time, this was in 2009. The iPhone had not come out yet. It was just coming out. So I
Right.
did not have any of the things that we have access to on the internet. But
Right.
they did blogs,
Yes.
and people would do blogs. Don't ask me how I found it, but I was so desperate to get answers. No one in my family had ever experienced what I had. And I felt so alone. And I would Google the word widow,
Mm-hmm.
and up would come blogs. I do not know these women. I will
Right.
forever thank them for what they did. And that's why, Abigail, I'm so thankful you're doing this. There is someone out there that is hurting as deep as I was in those first few years, and whoever else. And thank you for this, for those people. So I would take those blogs. I would just read every word. I would print it off. I've got all that printed. It's somewhere here today, to this day. And so books were hard to find on grief.
Mm-hmm.
And I would go, there was no Amazon that I
Right.
remember. So I would go to Barnes and Noble, and when I go see my family, I'd go down to Tulsa, and I'd go to Mardell's. And I remember with them one day, I said, you guys just go shopping, but I want to just go in here and go into this bookstore and be alone. And I started searching for books on grief, and I couldn't find very many, but anything helped me and let me
Right.
know I was normal in my feelings. And all
Yes.
these things that I was feeling, sure, they were there, but it was normal. And Job in the Bible, he described death as the king of terrors. And then King David mentioned the terrors of death have fallen upon me. It is a terrible thing. It's a horrible thing. And when grief came, it was very strong. And it was a place I could go. It was like a companion. And I came to this conclusion that, because I had never had that feeling before, but it came. It was dormant inside of me. And when I needed it the most, it activated itself.
Mm-hmm.
I found it hard to even pray like I had before. I did not blame God, never. But what I had prayed for and dreamed of was gone.
Yes.
And I would get down on my knees to pray, and all that would happen is tears for an hour. They'd just fall, and I couldn't stop. I couldn't talk. I couldn't do anything. So the only way to stop crying was I had to get up. So, and from prayer. And that's kind of like how my grief went for me.
You speak of, the support that your sisters have given you and others as well. I have a sister. I only have one sister, but she's been such a source of support to me. And while she doesn't exactly understand, just to have somebody to listen to you and just to have somebody just be that comfort,
Yes.
that comfort, there's just something about it. And was there any other kind of support? You also mentioned, going to the bookstore. And as you were speaking of that, my mind was flashing back to when my mom passed away. My dad lives literally right next to a shopping center, and there was a Barnes and Noble there as well. And I remember him always, just spent so much time at Barnes and Noble, and I would say, Dad, what are you doing? And what are you doing over there? And he was going and looking at books on grief and reading as much as he could, because again, there's not a lot of, I always say that widow and widowhood is one of those subjects nobody really wants to talk about because it's related to death, and death is scary, and death, as shared about the Bible, it's a terror. It's someone's worst nightmare. And so what kind of support has helped you the most over these last few years?
Well, I would have to say humanity. People. The person in the store that gives you an unsolicited smile. The stranger that you meet along life's way. God's great creation. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
you need them so much. The sweet saint in the church that makes her way to tell you how sorry she is it happened. Or the mother, she one told me that she came to me, she said, I really don't know you, and the tears are flowing, and she said, I just lost my mother. I know how you feel, and to find someone that knew how I felt. And together we cried. Thank you, Pam, that was her name, for doing that. It's the phone call that comes and just leaves a message. If they told me they called later, I could say, yes, I remember, because that's how alert your mind is in this season of loss.
Mm-hmm.
It was the call that came from another preacher's wife that I hardly knew and said, it's okay to ask God why. Job did.
Mm-hmm.
It was my mother and father standing in the kitchen when I was hurting so deep and Paul had died. And I will never forget the scene. My dad and mom were 81. He said, Louise, it was early morning. He said, Louise, they were just piddling in the kitchen. He was making breakfast or whatever she was. And Dad was the spokesman that day. He said, Louise, your mom and I love you. But sometimes we just don't know what to say. We never lost someone like you have. We really hurt for you, but we just don't know what to say. And that was my dad. I would say humanity.
That's beautiful. How do you honor Brother Blatto's memory now?
Well, Paul set a high bar for Christianity, yet he never thought about it. He just did it consistently, daily, like a machine, yet with all his heart. He was strong in mind and body. When God singled him out to be saved, he served him with all his heart, holy. Not only did I witness that, but my two sons saw it and knew that he was the real deal. He never disappointed them. Much of who they are today is because of the father they had. So with that in mind, my goal, and I will honor him by continuing to live for God faithfully and with all my heart, as I did before I found him, and then while we had each other. His memory will always be one of respect and admiration in my mind. Yet I owe it to my children, and I owe it to myself, and I owe it to the whole world to remain faithful and never diminish my faithfulness to God. That's how I plan to honor him.
That's so moving, and I mean, what a testament to your husband's memory, for both yourself as well as your boys. You did mention that you have your two boys, but now I'm assuming that your boys have since married and possibly have children.
Yes, that's true.
Okay. So
Yeah.
how many grandchildren do you have?
I have 5 grandchildren.
5 grandchildren.
I have 2 wonderful daughter-in-laws, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And Rocky was 38 when he got married, but boy, and Jonathan found Shelby very younger, and they both are wonderful girls and are wonderful mothers, and they love their husbands dearly. And so yes.
And I know that brings you joy. Because as a mother of grown children myself, there's nothing like having that peace that your children have someone who loves God and then loves them and loves their children. What does trusting God look like on hard days?
Well, trusting God is probably the most beautiful part of my whole story. It's not hard to trust God if you really know Him.
Mm-hmm.
And as I have already said, He's been with me every step of the way, long before I knew Paul. And I can say that 17 years later, He has given me beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, and He has made everything beautiful in His time. I want to go back to something you asked me about my grandchildren. And losing Paul was one of the most painful things I've ever been through. He trusted me. He believed in me wholly, and I guess he gave me space to be myself and kind of seemed to enjoy it, whatever. We had so many plans ahead, and then he was gone. And to talk about the past was so painful. And to talk about the present was just as painful. And there was no future that we could talk about in those final days. And so I cried. I would wipe the tears, but they would fall again.
Mm-hmm.
The Bible says love never fails.
Mm-hmm.
And when you lose the love of your life, it looks like love has failed. But let me tell you, about 9 years ago, when that first grandson, John Lucas Blatto, was born, my first grandchild, something happened that I can't explain. And now I have those 5 wonderful grandchildren. Jonathan's given me 3 sons, and Rocky's given me 2 daughters. And this world of mine is spinning with a lot of joy.
Yes. I know you were not only an evangelist's wife, but also a pastor's wife. And having the opportunity to have had many pastors' wives on this podcast, how has your identity changed since becoming a widow?
Before Paul died, in my mind, I just knew my identity was going to change. In fact, one day, my mother-in-law, she's a short, darling Italian mama. She is beautiful. She was beautiful. And yeah, she was a typical Italian mother and spunky. And she was here during those final days. And one day I said to her, Genevieve, I called her mom, what will I do? Who will I be? I will lose all my identity when he dies.
Mm-hmm.
She turned so fast to me and looked at me quickly, and she said, you are you. Paul didn't make you. No one can take your identity from you. And I think my sister Kathy was standing nearby and overheard the conversation. She said, oh, Louise, no one can take out of you who you are. And I remember that moment. But however, as a result of me becoming a widow, losing my husband, it did transition me into a different connection with people.
Mm-hmm.
There were people who, after his death, came into my life who would have probably never come into my life. And I have friends that became closer friends, and in a way that may have never evolved to that direction had he stayed alive.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, I didn't lose any friends, and people have treated me with the same respect, but I have definitely made a transition and enlarged my world.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
Yes. It's a different perspective. As you were speaking, I was thinking, oftentimes we think of, well, who am I now? Who am I and what am I going to be? But I think your perspective of I'm still the same person. And
right.
Now there's going to be different people that come into my life.
That's right.
And I'm going to be exposed to maybe people I had never been exposed to before and have experiences exactly. So I think that's a beautiful perspective. What has loss taught you about love, Sister Blatto?
Well, I think I kind of covered that when I talked about losing Paul and the love of my grandchildren. And you do lose. You do lose. It is a loss that you cannot get back. So don't even try. I mean, I'm not diminishing that feeling, but that you're just going to lose it, and you'll never get it back. And it is a love that was very great and very, very real, and you want it back. But you have to, in time, you accept the fact that I have to walk this road the way I'm going to have to walk it to live beyond that point. And so love is a real thing. It's a wonderful thing. And when you have it, I'm thankful I had it. It brings me much satisfaction to know that God did bring that into my life and gave me two wonderful sons, and we had a wonderful life together.
And that love continues on. That love is continued on in your children and in your grandchildren. Well, as we come to a close of our time together today, I would love for you to share some advice. Like, what type of advice would you give to a newer widow? And then any final thoughts or words that you would share with our listeners today?
Okay. I would say to a new widow, that void is so real and the loss is so great. But ma'am, you can do it. You may be young, you may be middle-aged or up in years, and you'll probably go through things and say things that you don't even remember you said that are very painful to someone else because you're hurting so bad. You're just in a zone that you're not thinking straight. And so it will never be the same. But the great healing process is going to take time. It's not fast. I remember it 4 years out. I remember realizing I could talk about it without that lump that was so deep in me coming to my throat and the tears fall. It was, in fact, today, I'm sure you've heard my voice crack a little bit because the tears are there, but they're very deep. They're not right there at my throat, and the tears are not sitting, pooling right behind my eyes.
Yes.
And so that's how it is when you first go through this terrible thing. Stay faithful to God. Find a church or stay faithful to your church, whatever the situation is, but stay with God. He knows your grief. He was acquainted with sorrow. He knows our grief. That was him. He knew grief, and he'll understand you. I don't care if you're a churchgoer or not. He understands you and he loves you. You will make it. You'll laugh and smile, and that identity in you will remain intact. And my final words would be, we're stronger than we give ourselves credit for. And life does take on new meaning. My mother-in-law, God rest her soul, was full of some great words. And I found this the other day that she had told me, and I went and wrote it down right after she said it. She said it like this: Louise, from Adam, this is how God set it up. Life and death. He is no respecter of persons. That's God. He knows we're no place near where he is. Go forth with purpose. There is a purpose. It's our humanity that wants to hang on to this life. But God knows there's a much better place than here. I decided at the beginning, after he died, I had no idea what to do. I decided to stay in Bakersfield. The housing market had crumbled, and it just didn't seem prudent for me to try to make a change. Besides that, I love California. So to all of you, I say, one day you'll be able to turn your upside down world right side up again. And that's my story.
Thank you, Sister Blatto. I'm always encouraged by the wonderful words presented in a multitude of ways, just to hear your story, hear your love story with Brother Blatto, and then the positivity that you still have today, all these years later. And one thing that's going to remain with me is what you just mentioned. Go forth with purpose. Go forth with purpose. And each one of us have a purpose. And, you know, if you're a new widow, finding that purpose sometimes seems to be like stumbling around in the dark. But God has a purpose for each one of us.
Right.
And as you said, trust him and hold to his unseen hands. And in due time, we all will know our purpose. Yes. And so thank you for being willing to come on and be vulnerable and share your story and share your pearls of wisdom, because they have definitely blessed me, and I know they have blessed our listeners. Thank you for listening to The Business of Widows. If today's conversation brought you comfort, clarity, or hope, I invite you to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with another widow or widower who might need it. Remember, you are loved, you are seen, and you don't have to walk this road alone. Join me next time as we continue sharing real stories of grief, grace, and God's goodness, because healing is holy and hope is still alive.